The cabin lights dimmed as Flight 327 cruised above the clouds. Passengers sipped coffee, flipped through magazines, and dozed off. But then, suddenly, two F-22 Raptors pulled up alongside the plane, their silver wings flashing in the sun. The captain's voice cracked through the intercom, his tone shaken yet reverent. "Ladies and gentlemen, those fighter jets aren't here to escort us. They're here to honor someone sitting quietly among us. Someone in seat 18A." The low hum of the engines filled the cabin, steady and familiar, like white noise that lulled most passengers into a sense of calm. Flight 327 from Dallas to Washington, D.C. was halfway through its journey, cruising at 34,000 feet. Businessmen tapped away on laptops, children leaned against their mothers and dozed, and flight attendants moved with practiced ease down the narrow aisles. Everything about the flight was perfectly ordinary. In seat 18A, near the left-hand window, sat a woman who seemed equally ordinary. She was quiet, dressed simply in a dark jacket and jeans, with a small duffel tucked beneath the seat in front of her. She looked out occasionally, her eyes tracing the horizon, but mostly she remained still, as if her thoughts were elsewhere. To the casual eye, she could have been anyone, a teacher, an accountant, maybe just a tired traveler returning home. But at 1:47 p.m., everything changed. Passengers stirred as the plane gave a slight shudder. Not turbulence, this felt different. The captain's voice broke through the intercom, calm but clipped. "Ladies and gentlemen, you may notice two aircraft approaching on our left-hand side. There's no cause for alarm, they are friendly aircraft." Heads turned, necks craned. And then the gasps spread like a wave through the cabin. Outside, flying in perfect formation, were two F-22 Raptors, sleek, predatory, their wings catching the sunlight like blades of steel. They were close enough that passengers could see the pilots' helmets glinting beneath the canopy. Fighter jets weren't a common sight on commercial routes. To see them this close? Unheard of. Speculation rippled through the rows. Was there a threat? A VIP on board? Some sort of military exercise? Nervous laughter mingled with anxious whispers. Parents held their children closer. Businessmen glanced uneasily at one another. But then came the strangest detail of all. Instead of pulling away or circling, the jets stayed locked in alongside the airliner, steady and deliberate, as though waiting for something. Their presence wasn't hostile, it was ceremonial, purposeful. And then, in the cockpit, the captain himself seemed to falter. His voice returned, this time softer, heavier with emotion. "Folks, those aircraft aren't here to escort us. They're here for someone sitting right here among us. Someone in seat 18A." Every head in the cabin turned in unison. The woman in 18A shifted uncomfortably, her eyes still fixed on the horizon. She didn't look surprised, but neither did she acknowledge the attention. She sat with the calmness of someone who had seen skies far more dangerous than this one. The whispers grew louder. Who is she? Why the fighters? What could possibly make the U.S. Air Force break formation to honor one quiet passenger on a routine flight? No one knew it yet, but the call sign carried by the woman in 18A was legendary, and the salute from those Raptors was not just protocol. It was a farewell. The silence in the cabin was heavy, broken only by the steady drone of the engines. Every set of eyes had shifted toward row 18. Some passengers leaned across aisles, others half stood to get a better look. But the woman in seat 18A remained perfectly still, her gaze fixed on the jets outside, as if she knew them. The captain's voice returned, carrying both reverence and a tremor of disbelief. "Ladies and gentlemen, it's not every day you share a flight with history. The passenger in seat 18A once flew with the very same call sign those Raptors are saluting. She is a decorated combat pilot, one of the first women to fly missions over hostile territory. The Air Force remembers her, and today they're here to honor her." A collective intake of breath swept the cabin. Some passengers looked at her with awe, others with quiet respect. A teenage boy whispered, "She's a fighter pilot?" to his mother, who nodded, eyes wide. A businessman in a crisp suit lowered his laptop screen. suddenly embarrassed by the trivial work he'd been so consumed by. The woman didn't acknowledge the announcement. Instead, she let out a long breath, her fingers brushing the edge of the window as though reaching toward the raptors. Her face softened, not pride, not arrogance, something more complicated. Memory. Loss. Perhaps even grief. A flight attendant, usually unflappable, approached cautiously. She crouched beside her seat and whispered, "Ma'am, would you like to say anything? To the passengers?" The woman shook her head. "No words," she murmured. Her voice was low, steady, and carried the weight of someone who had seen too much to waste language on ceremony. But the passengers were not finished wondering. Speculation turned into murmured questions. What had she done? What battles had she flown? Which skies had she carved her name into? The F-22s outside were no small gesture. This was not routine military courtesy. This was rare, intimate, reserved for legends. And then one man, older and grizzled, leaned across the aisle. He had been quiet until now, but his eyes shone with recognition. "I know that call sign," he said softly, almost to himself. "Valkyrie." The name rippled through the rows like electricity. Passengers repeated it, tasting the word, whispering it as if it carried its own gravity. The Valkyrie. The name that had appeared in classified reports, whispered among pilots, scribbled into histories not meant for public eyes. She had been a ghost in the skies, feared by enemies, revered by allies. And here she was, silent, anonymous, sitting in seat 18A on a routine commercial flight. Outside, the F-22s held formation, waiting for the moment when they would dip their wings in salute. Not to a general, not to a politician, but to one of their own. The cabin, once buzzing with confusion, now brimmed with reverence. Every passenger understood, even if they didn't know the details. They weren't just sharing a plane with a stranger. They were sharing it with a legend. The airliner pressed forward through the clear afternoon sky, but no one inside was thinking about their destination anymore. Every passenger was locked in the moment, caught between awe and silence, watching as the two Raptors outside held their perfect line. Their wings didn't waver, their engines thundered in steady harmony, like guards standing watch. The woman in 18A finally moved. She reached down to her duffel bag, unzipped it quietly, and drew out a small, worn patch. The fabric was frayed at the edges, the stitching faded from years of wear. Embroidered across the patch was the call sign everyone had just heard whispered through the cabin. Valkyrie. She set it gently on her lap, her hand resting over it, as though guarding something sacred. The captain spoke again, his voice thick with emotion. "Folks, tradition dictates that when a warrior of the skies takes their final journey, they are not left unrecognized. Today, those jets are here to give a tribute, one that very few ever receive. If you'll look out the left windows, you'll witness a salute reserved only for the bravest." The cabin leaned as passengers pressed toward the windows, breath held in anticipation. Then it happened. In perfect unison, the two F-22s slid slightly ahead of the airliner. Their sleek frames caught the sunlight, and then, slowly, deliberately, they dipped their wings. A simple gesture, but in the language of the skies, it was profound. A salute not from one pilot to another, but from an entire brotherhood of aviators acknowledging one of their own. Gasps broke into quiet murmurs. A few passengers even clapped softly, but most simply bowed their heads, as though in church. The atmosphere in the cabin had transformed. This was no longer a commercial flight. It was a ceremony, a passage. Tears welled in the eyes of those who understood, even vaguely, what they were witnessing. The teenage boy who had whispered earlier now sat glued to the window, his mouth slightly open. His mother put a hand on his shoulder, her own eyes misty. The older man who had recognized her call sign gave a subtle nod of respect toward 18A. The woman herself didn't smile. She didn't wave. She simply looked out the window, her expression calm, her hand still resting over that patch. She seemed neither surprised nor overwhelmed, only settled. As though this was a chapter closing in the only way it ever could. After a long, reverent pause, the Raptors peeled away, banking left and vanishing into the horizon. Their thunderous engines faded, leaving only the steady hum of the airliner's turbines. The sky seemed emptier without them. Inside, the silence lingered. Then, quietly, the captain's voice returned. "Ladies and gentlemen, you have just witnessed something extraordinary. The Valkyrie has flown her last mission. On behalf of this crew and those who served alongside her, we thank her for her service." The cabin erupted, not with the boisterous applause of entertainment, but with the deep, resonant clapping of gratitude. It wasn't just noise, it was respect, offered from every seat. And in seat 18A, the woman sat quietly, her patch in her lap, her eyes still on the horizon. She had been just another passenger. Now, she was something more, a legend among strangers, honored in the skies she once ruled.